Right, so we'll move on to the final speaker of the day, Colin Mason from University of Glasgow. So, Colin, the floor is yours, and I'll kind of give you a kind of little notice around 12 minutes, and then you could continue a little bit longer anyways.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I've got quite a lot of material here, so if we can yell after 12 to 15 minutes, that'd be great. Slightly different title to what was advertised, but not too much. Okay, why are we talking about why are we talking about entrepreneurial ecosystems? Well, it's emerged as an attempt to explain why entrepreneurial activity has geographical variations. To use Richard Florida's phrase that I like, why is it that entrepreneurial activity is spiking? We have lots of different definitions. This is kind of one of them that I'm using, a supportive and networked set of interconnected entrepreneurial actors, entrepreneurial organizations and institutions that facilitate, enable and support entrepreneurial activity through a virtuous self-reinforcing process that supports further entrepreneurial activity. We're familiar with the various components. We saw that in John's presentation earlier. We just want to focus on this last point here. Where, when, and how do entrepreneurial ecosystems emerge? To me, that's a major gap in the literature, which focuses primarily on a static analysis of established ecosystems. Again, going back to John's presentation with the framework, Eric Stam's framework. How did these components, how did these resources emerge? The literature, there are few studies that have attempted to answer that question, and that's what I'm trying to answer here in this presentation. Let me quickly run through a few themes in the literature that maybe help us with this question. First point is that the foundations of entrepreneurial ecosystems are often built many years before we recognize that there is an ecosystem there. Second point is that the spin-off process is critical. So incubator organizations that spawn the entrepreneurs are vital. Done some research with Sarah Cooper and Richard Harrison looking at this process in Ottawa, about 20 years ago now. I would argue blockbuster entrepreneurship is important. The law of small numbers. Again, if you look around different ecosystems, successful ecosystems around the world, you find that they're typically driven just by a handful of hugely successful entrepreneurs. Terry Matthews in Ottawa, the folk with BlackBerry RIM in Waterloo, for example. Herman Hauser in Cambridge, for example. Fourth observation is that growth is driven by what Richard and I called in an early paper before the word entrepreneurial ecosystems was in popular parlance, entrepreneurial ecosystems. Entrepreneurs who have built up successful companies, which they sell typically to global businesses, may work with these businesses for a while, but then leave to reinvest their wealth and their expertise in the cluster, in the ecosystem as serial entrepreneurs, as investors, as mentors, as institution builders, and so on. I was listening earlier today to a pitch by a company who had got one of the guys from Innocent Smoothie Drinks on his board, and he was talking about just the connections and as well as the money, all the other things that this guy brings to his business. So that's an example. Fifth point is sometimes failure is the spark that starts the spin-off process. It's often big corporates shrinking in size. The folk, rather than getting other jobs or leaving to go somewhere else, start their own businesses. One of the early ecosystem studies of Boulder, I think, demonstrated that one of the early drivers of Boulder was IBM shrinking. Brad Feld, I'm quite a fan of, with some reservations, talks about the importance of culture in ecosystems as well. Universities, as we've heard already, and John was talking about that again, are important, maybe less so than some people think. They attract talent to the area. They're a source of startups. And then finally, leadership's important. Again, I'm drawing on Feld here. He argues that experienced entrepreneurs play a leadership role in the ecosystem, driving its development. And I love this quote. Maybe it's a bit of an exaggeration, but he says, when a startup community starts relying on government to be leader, bad things happen. Entrepreneurial ecosystems are dynamic, and as we see them evolving, we see that the spin-off process gathers momentum in virtuous self-reinforcing processes. We see the emergence of resource providers, local finance providers. Local successes attract the interest of non-local investors. We see the emergence of what Feldman and Zoller call liaison animators, or connectors, sorry, Sweeney called them that, connectors, who play a key role in ecosystems. We have the emergence of deal makers, sort of guys like the innocent smoothie guys who have connections, resources, can provide mentoring and so on, become board members. They're important. We see the emergence of entrepreneurial service providers. And we see institutional emergence, what we've heard of already today, accelerators, networking organizations, and so on. So with that background, let me move to my empirical study. Many of us are in the room are geographers, so we'll all probably know where Atlantic Canada is. It's northeastern part of Canada, 4 provinces, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador. So that's my focus, particularly Nova Scotia, but the 4 provinces. I've drawn my evidence from a whole variety of sources, various rounds of interviews, telephone interviews, face-to-face interviews, attending various events, involved in a current study with folk at Memorial University in Newfoundland on the closure of a tech company in seeding, the St. John's ecosystem. Also drawn on lots of secondary sources, in particular an organisation called Investor, which provides reports and research on the region. So in terms of kind of geographical context, Atlantic Canada is not really a very promising area for entrepreneurial activity. It's peripheral. One useless fact is that Halifax, the main city in Nova Scotia, is actually closer to Liverpool in the UK than it is to Vancouver on the west coast of Canada. It's politically fragmented, 4 very small provinces, each kind of competing with each other. Demographics, aging population, out-migration, relatively low wages, geographically dispersed population, low density, no major urban centres. Halifax is the biggest urban centre, about 400,000 population. The other urban areas are all kind of the 3 or 4 other urban centres of 100 to 200,000 population, well, close to 100,000. Long-term economically depressed region, reliance on what they have in Canada, equalization payments, where the kind of the wealthy provinces pass money over to the have-not provinces in simple terms, which somebody says creates a learned helplessness in these regions. The economy dominated by resource-based industries, high dependence on government spending, lack of high-level corporate offices and technology-intensive firms. So a lack of talent magnets in the area. But it has got some things good. The region's got some things going for it. Quality of life, and as large cities become less attractive, diseconomies, high cost of living, cities, particularly like Halifax, are becoming more populous places to go. Younger people are rejecting the traditional option of out-migrating, saying, why should I have to leave? We're getting return migration. It's an attractive area for in migrants. The region of only kind of 2.5 million population has got 10 universities. And I say they attract a lot of international students. Nova Scotia's got more graduates per capita in engineering, applied science and mathematics and physical science than any other Canadian province. The key source of kind of the technological base comes actually from the provincial telecom companies, particularly NBTEL, North Brunswick Telecoms, which became very innovative to compete with the big telecom companies of Bell and Allianz and so on. They were a major source of R&D. Halifax has got an international airport, small place, everybody knows each other. So this is a wonderful picture of downtown Halifax on the peninsula. So there's been a major growth of entrepreneurial activity in the past decade in this region. Increase in startups, increase in high growth companies and scale-ups. Investor talks about we're moving from a community of small experimental companies to a group that includes several high growth corporations with international reach, attracting venture capital from outside the region, attracting acquirers from outside the region. Global companies are buying up successful entrepreneurial companies in the Atlantic region. But we have a tech community that's concentrated sectorally, largely in IT, and in Nova Scotia, particularly in Halifax. I'll skip over this because just visually the growth in startups, the growth in new companies, the growth in VC. 2019 was an exceptional year for one very lumpy, large VC investment. A book came out last year by Gordon Pitts called Unicorn in the Woods, describing and talking about some of the very successful scale-ups in the region. Mentioned some very big exits have happened over the last 10 years. One of them, I'll just flag up Verifin in the most peripheral part of Atlantic Canada, St. John's in Newfoundland, bought by Nasdaq in November for $2.8 billion US, a huge acquisition. So that's good. So something is happening in this region. A lot of things are happening in this region. This entrepreneurial activity is the outcome of the emergence of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. Incubators, accelerator programs, finance, both seed capital, venture capital, competitions, talent is developing in the region, particularly attracted by the universities, R&D activities, mentoring events, mentoring networks, events, and large companies have all emerged to support or generate this entrepreneurial activity. Here's another way of looking at it. The startup fund of universities, a key source of the talent, through the curriculum, through extracurricular activities, financing, incubators, and accelerators. So let me elaborate on this emerging entrepreneurial ecosystem. Entrepreneurial talent, as I say, the younger folk are increasingly rejecting the out-migration option and looking to kind of create their own jobs in the region rather than going to Toronto or wherever for jobs. The region has increased its in-migration, especially international students who are becoming more sticky. They're more likely to stay in the region. I think I saw a statistic that said 75% of immigrants to Atlantic Canada are staying in the region rather than using it as a stepping stone to move to Toronto or Vancouver or wherever. The universities are very important. They're developing entrepreneurial programs. They're embedding entrepreneurship across the curriculum, particularly Dalhousie and St. Mary's. They're engaging their tech students with industry through a whole variety of programs. They're doing startup programs. LaunchDEL is really a very innovative set of programs. They're developing incubators. Overall, as one of my interviewees said, they're helping students to interact with the ecosystem, taste it and smell it. And a lot of the businesses that have been started can trace their origins back to students at universities. Here's the DAL ecosystem of sandboxes that connects students with industry, seed funding, the LaunchDEL program, the courses, programs, co-op programs where students spend, what we call sandwich courses, where students spend 6 to 9 months as part of the degree in local businesses, the student initiatives, there's entrepreneurial activity in engineering and computing facilities, for example. We've seen the emergence of incubators. Volta Labs, they're developing kind of ocean tech now, so that's emerging. Again, quotes, incubators make people better founders. It's becoming the norm to go from grad school to hub or incubator. We're also seeing accelerators, kind of mentoring programs, virtual mentoring programs. We're seeing the engagement of professional firms to support entrepreneurial businesses. We're seeing the emergence of finance, private sources, although the business angel are actually underdeveloped there. Government is important, provincial governments, organizations, provincial government venture capital funds, joint private provincial scale-up funds. Government has been important in providing non-dilutive finance for startups and so on. We've also seen the emergence of collective leadership. One emerged called the Innovation Federation, an informal network, including the DAL president, a guy from ACOA, the Regional Development Agency, a guy from Technology Transfer Operations, private sector VC, a very successful entrepreneur. Halifax was part of the MIT REAP program, and that's now emerging as a kind of new leadership forum. So we're seeing leadership. So why has all this happened? Well, it comes back to mega exits that occurred around 2011, particularly in New Brunswick, well, both in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. The two New Brunswick acquisitions can be linked back to NBTEL from about 10 years earlier. That created the fertile soil from which Q1 Labs and Radian 6 emerged. From these and other entrepreneurial exits, we've seen entrepreneurial recycling. Some of the folk have created new infrastructures. Jerry Pond has created this accelerator. Jevon McDonald was a driver of the key incubator, Volta Labs. The exit of Radian 6 has been said to have created 40 millionaires just in Fredericton, a small town in New Brunswick. Given that government VC funds were also investors in many of these exits, they've generated a return on their investment, which they have recycled as well. It's put the region on the map. Suddenly VCs from the US and from Toronto have suddenly taken notice. Here's a region where you can get good deals. We're seeing serial entrepreneurs and, of course, the cultural influence as role models. And, of course, the acquisitions have brought multinational companies like Salesforce into the region as well. Going back to my point, I've only got about 2 slides left, so I'm nearly on time. The importance of blockbuster exits, as I mentioned earlier. Jerry Pond, who was one of the investors, well, an entrepreneur and an investor in Radian 6, he's used his wealth to set up consultancy company, Mariner Partners, East Valley Venture, a venture capital fund. He set up Propel, the accelerator. Somebody described him as an innovator, rainmaker, angel investor, social entrepreneur, and forward thinker. He funded a chair in social entrepreneurship at one of the local universities. Jevon McDonald, one of the Halifax exits, he's founded Volta Labs and also set up another company, and his co-founders been involved in boosting the ecosystem as well. Universities, as I said, have been critical. They've been attracting talent, creating entrepreneurial mindsets, helping to start and accelerate entrepreneurs. Some of the large companies in the region are also important. As I said before, DAL particularly works very collaboratively with large companies as part of the kind of course curricula, working with students. Some of the large companies, McCain, we're all familiar with McCain, potato chips, oven-ready chips. They're based in New Brunswick. They've been an early adopter of some of the tech products, particularly, what was I going to say, sorry, a drone to kind of monitor when crops are ready for harvesting. They're key in developing that company. Government has actually been critical. They've funded most of the infrastructure in the entrepreneurial system. But the philosophy has been that they've supported the ecosystem by leveraging private sector people, private sector initiatives, and private money, not running things. As somebody said to me, we set the table, step back and see what happens. And as I say, going back to the point about political fragmentation, they've sought to develop pan-Atlantic initiatives, trying to get the provinces to collaborate with each other. And for example, created Build Ventures, a Series A, Series B venture capital fund that is Atlantic Canada oriented rather than provincial oriented. And again, to link up a point in the chat, they've looked externally for models, expertise and resources. Volta's modeled on Communitech, which has been hugely successful in Waterloo. Sandboxes have been modeled in MIT. They looked outside the area for people. So the CEO of Volta came from Communitech. They brought in mentoring expertise from outside the region and resources, a lot of venture capital. So the last slide, final 3 observations. There's an interesting disconnect between the new tech economy and the resource-based economy. The wealth that was created or the wealthy families from the resource-based economy, the so-called codfathers, have not, for the most part, invested in the new tech economy. John Risley of Clearwater Foods does lobsters and so on, is one of the few exceptions. Very few family offices have invested. Killick Ventures in Newfoundland is one of the very few. They invested in Verifin and made a lot of money out of it. Second point is, to what extent is it smart luck or is it serendipity? A lot of the things that clearly have made a difference may appear to be serendipitous, like the mega exits in 2011-12. You can't kind of plan for that, but you can create the fertile soil that makes helps the potential emergence of companies that might be attractive acquisition targets. So what might appear as serendipity could actually be traced back to developments in the past. And the last point is the role of government. I don't believe they can create ecosystems, but as I think this region shows, they can and do play an important role in fertilizing the soil, sometimes unintentionally, but also intentionally. So that's me. I'm surprised I managed to get done in time without running over. So I look forward to your comments. So I should say, when I wrote this paper up, it ended up at 16,000 words. So it kind of was too long for a paper and too short for a monograph. So I'm going to opt for one or other to get it published. But anyway, thanks.
Yep. Thank you, Colin. That's fantastic, and it's kind of aligns really nicely with the special issue you put together recently.
Yeah, I forgot to plug that. You told me to plug it, but yeah, the special issue in ERD on Entrepreneurial Ecosystems that Christina's got a paper in.
Yep.
Yes.
Can I just kick off with the kind of question/comment? It's really fascinating because I did some work as a kind of postdoc back in 2006 in Atlantic Canada, and it was about the role of universities in regional development, and kind of moved around the area, and it was organized by the OECD. So it's kind of interestingly kind of connects to the sort of policy kind of use of role of universities, and it was primarily regional innovation focused back then, 2006. And then ACOA was quite active in that space.
For those ACOA is Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, so it's a regional development agency funded by the federal government for the
yeah, so it's good to see the kind of continuation. That's kind of one thing. But then back then in 2006, universities was focus of the study, and they were really keen to be the kind of driver of the regional economy. But really the problem was everyone just leaves the region, and then they just go to the sort of west to work in the oil industry. And then the cafes in the sort of town says, if you don't go and leave, come and work with us. It's just a real shortage of, labor, like, people working in the cafe from that level on. So from what you said, like 5 years before this acquisition, nothing like this was happening. So it's just stunning. Like, so universities has been important, but it wasn't played that role back then.
I had a visiting position at St Mary's University in Halifax from 2006 to 2009. And Ellen Farrell had got a very innovative entrepreneurship startup class for undergrads, but there wasn't an awful lot else happening then. But you go back to St Mary's now, and they have an MSc in technology entrepreneurship, for example. DAL wasn't doing half the stuff that they're doing now. So yeah, it has been a remarkable transition over the last 10 years, and universities reflect this too. Yeah.
Absolutely. So anyone wants to ask a question? Yep. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yes, I'm from Ohio State University, and Colin, thank you very much, very inspiring. And in fact, I'll be talking about St. Louis next week, and I'm finding so many parallels. So like to hear your reaction then too. But my question is about the recycles. What is the time frame? So there are some mega exits, and after that, those entrepreneurs starting a new companies or investing in new local companies, how long does it seem to take place?
Okay, that's a good question. I think to some extent it depends on the deal, because at least in some of the acquisitions, the dealers, the entrepreneurs got to stay with the company under its new ownership to kind of help embed it and so on. So there might be a 2 year or 3 year, 3 years part of the deal. The entrepreneurs have got to do that, maybe non-compete clause. But certainly most of the entrepreneurs that I've talked to, they're not corporate people, so they want to leave as soon as they can. But certainly, I would generalize, but certainly within 3 to 5 years, that's probably the window when you begin to see things happening. Of course, the entrepreneurs are going to sit back and say, well, what am I going to do with this life-changing wealth? So I mean, I've had a chat with one of the Verifin guys, this $2.8 billion, and they're going to stay with work with the company under Nasdaq. So I can't see much happening with Verifin for a few years. Although interestingly, as part of the deal, Nasdaq is investing in the Genesis Center. So that's Memorial University's incubator unit, where Verifin came out of, or started in 2003 and came out of. So yeah, but I would say, generalize it, but 3 to 5 years you would expect to see, because not every entrepreneur recycles. It depends on their personal circumstances. Of the 3 founders of Radian 6, only one of them has actually done significant recycling. Most of the recycling has been done by people like Jerry Pond, who's one of the investors in Radian 6 rather than one of the entrepreneurs.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Evelyn Clark. I'm working on the space entrepreneurial ecosystem, and I was wondering, when you spoke about all these scales from territory to national to regional level, I was wondering if we can divide a global entrepreneurial ecosystem into sub-ecosystem. I mean, can we have some cities with their own specialties in a global entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Well, I think we talk about maybe talk about a global ecosystem. Maybe it's a bit of a contradiction, because as I said, we're explaining why some places are more entrepreneurial than others. But I would kind of see it almost, I think the analogy is a Russian doll. So, I mean, people talk about national ecosystems, which I'm not really too convinced by, unless you're talking about somewhere like Estonia or something like that. But then you've got arguably regional ecosystems. Certainly you've got kind of city ecosystems. And even in the city, we're now talking about kind of neighborhood ecosystems. Brad Feld and Ian Hathaway in their new book have an interesting discussion about the relationships between big city ecosystems and kind of smaller city ecosystems. So they talk about the relationship between Boulder and Denver, for example. I haven't read it to admit, but I've heard them talk about a presentation of that. So I think there's an interesting dynamic there between kind of satellite ecosystems, or satellite city ecosystems and mega city ecosystems as well to look at. So the whole geographical relationships, I think, are really very complex. I don't think we really got a handle around that.
I think there are a few questions, but I'm just going to read out the question from Ben Spiegel. I know he's got like audio constraint today. He says, hi, Colin, really interesting stuff. I wonder if some places were better than others at ensuring that some of the profits from mega exit recycled back into the ecosystem. How do we stop successful entrepreneurs from, of horrors, spending their money on feeding the hungry rather than inventing in the local economy?
Well, I mean, my experience is that successful cashed out entrepreneurs do multiple things. So, I mean, let's talk about, well, I can think of entrepreneurs who'll do some social stuff, and they'll maybe become an investor, they might become an entrepreneur as well. So it's not exclusive. So just because you're reinvesting your wealth in entrepreneurial stuff doesn't exclude you from doing some social. I mean, well, Jerry Pond, he's funded a chair in social entrepreneurship at UNB, as well as doing all these other entrepreneurial stuff. It's a quick, can the extent of recycling be influenced by government? I don't know. I suspect not, because these folk are individual, and they'll want to do what they want to do. And again, I think there's an element of kind of peer pressure and role models. I think, I mean, in Scotland, we've got Tom Hunter, for example, as an extreme example of entrepreneur recycling in all sorts of different ways. I mean, he supports Africa, he supports, set up the Hunter Centre for Entrepreneurship at Strathclyde, where I used to work. He invests in entrepreneurial businesses. I mean, he's a classic example of multiple entrepreneur recycling from a successful entrepreneur. I mean, for those who don't know, this is a Scottish entrepreneur who built up a chain of sports shops, sold the business for about £250 million, I think it was, when he was age 37 or 39, and he thought, what will I do with the rest of my life?
Yep. In relation to that, someone, Claudia Manzo, sorry for the pronunciation, she's asking about your view about regional champions that attribute this level of success to individuals.
So I don't quite understand the point. What is meant by regional champions?
Claudia, would you like to?
I can rephrase. Yes, we can also call them boundary spanners or leaders. We have seen this in Silicon Valley, for example, in its initial phase, where it came down to an individual. And so I was wondering if this is also the case. You mentioned several startups, unicorns. So I wonder if you are also, came across some fantastic, extraordinary individuals that also pushed this agenda.
Well, clearly I'm not sure if I really if you understand the question, but clearly the unicorns are by definition kind of global. I'm just thinking of the kind of the the mega successful entrepreneurs in the region, to what extent they've drawn from outside. They're pretty much locally oriented in terms of what they do. I don't really know the answer to that question, really, because I focus on kind of what they've done in the region rather than looking at the kind of external links. But as I said before, in terms of external links, I mean, pipelines, as to use the term, being hugely important. A lot of the ideas, a lot of the models, and some of the key people that have driven the ecosystem in Atlantic Canada have come from outside, and particularly Waterloo, which Ben knows well, has been particularly important as a source of ideas, models, and people.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Here's an interesting comment from Kevin Moore. Would you like to tip in, or shall I read your comment in the box?
Yeah, well, it'll just be the same comment, really. It's thanks very much, Colin. It's interesting, but I guess it's natural, isn't it? We all kind of jump into the entrepreneurs because they're the actors and they're the ones who with all the action. But you also wanted to talk about the sowing of the seeds, and I guess I was thinking about, well, what policy implications would there be for places that wanted to try and sow the seeds, even if it didn't actually work in the end, kind of thing.
Right. That's a really good question. I mean, my original idea was to talk about New Brunswick, which had these 2 mega exits, and trace them back to the story of NBTEL. And I said in Canada, all the telco companies are provincially based. They were initially provincially owned, but ultimately sold to, acquired by Bell and Alliant. But New Brunswick, NBTEL, resisted that process for a long time. And to do that, they had to become very technologically advanced, very nimble. So they became, up to kind of 2000, a little bit beyond, they were very innovative in terms of what they were doing in the emerging internet and so on. And when eventually the New Brunswick government sold NBTEL to Bell Alliant, a lot of these smart, innovative people left, set up their own companies, which then many of which grew into these mega exits. So that's an example of the fertile soil. More broadly, I think if you're attracting inward investment, you want to be very selective in the sorts of activities you attract. You want to attract knowledge-based activities that are going to attract talented people who might in turn become incubators rather than just attracting low skill, the modern equivalent of what would have been the 1970s branch plants. I'm not quite sure what they would be, Amazon warehouses or whatever. So I think you have to be very selective in terms of and be proactive in trying to bring in organizations that have got activity, that are going to be talent magnets, that are going to generate knowledge that might spill over. I think that's really what I'm saying.
Thanks very much, Colin. So I think we're a bit sort of behind the schedule, but it was just sort of fascinating presentation of the discussion. So thank you very much again to Colin and everyone for the discussion and all the speakers today. So we'll wrap up the formal part of the session here. So thanks everyone again, and thanks to Dan, who has set up everything so beautifully.